You're going to have to use your imagination once again. Imagine that you're looking at a 10-foot high sign that says Plattsburgh Air Force Base Recreation Center. We're behind the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base Recreation Center on what we used to call the new portion of the base. Almost a misnomer because it was built in the mid-1950s. In any case, we have a good reason for being here today on our little corner on the 20th day of November 1999. A crisp fall morning, but not as cold as some we've had. And as you can see, there is no snow on the ground. We're going to recreate a battle, one of the most famous naval battles of all time, at least for us here in the North Country, and we hope we can convince the world of that before we're through. The Battle of Plattsburgh is part of the War of 1812. And this is a rather historic occasion itself that's planned for this weekend. Calvin and I arrived a little bit early so we could get to interview some of the principals involved here. And based on a news release, let me tell you a little bit of what we can plan to show you over the next couple of days as we put this composite program together here on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base. It says on Saturday, November 20th, that's today, Plattsburgh will make history again when a select group of the world's leading authorities on the Naval War of 1812 gather for a historic recreation of the famous naval battle that changed American history forever. Using a scaled map of the bay, get this now, covering 3,500 square feet, 1:96 scale replicas of both fleets, the experts will painstakingly recreate the progression of the battle from the beginning to the American victory. Using eyewitness accounts, maps, and other research data, the team will analyze every facet of the action to build a solid consensus on placement and damage. You may ask why? Well, for a very good reason. Based on this recreation, a famous artist by the name of Dean Moser, whom we hope to introduce to you today, will then begin creating an epic painting of this event to produce the most accurate and comprehensive depiction of the battle ever produced, to be unveiled by September 2000. And the team members, and this is a rather prestigious group, include Professor James C. Bradford. He is acknowledged by many in the historical community as the finest American naval history scholar in our country. Working with the Naval Institute Press, Professor Bradford has written or contributed to 16 books on American naval history. He taught history at the United States Naval Academy for 10 years. He's currently on the faculty of Texas A&M. Also with us today will be Professor Kevin Chrisman. He is one of the nation's premier underwater archaeologists, specializing in Lake Champlain vessels. He has meticulously recreated many of the battle's vessels from historical documents, together with actual hands-on measurements of their sunken remains. Professor Chrisman has recently recreated the plans for the 37-gun Confiance, or Confiance, if you will, flagship of the British fleet. The model to be used at the conference is based on this important research. Walter Ribka, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, captain of the U.S. brig Niagara, flagship of the state of Pennsylvania. His decades of experience aboard tall ships and years of sailing and practical experience have made him one of the world's leading authorities on the construction and handling of vessels of this era. And General T. Althoff, author of several books on naval battles of the War of 1812. Mr. Althoff is also the U.S. Park Service's black powder experts for firing cannons and carronades of his era, or of this era that we're talking about, the War of 1812. His knowledge of the ordnance, men, uniforms, and history of the War of 1812 is without peer. The news release goes on to say, never before has such an august team of experts been gathered together to recreate this historic battle. All this effort is to help reawaken a sense of the importance of the victory that truly saved our nation at a critical moment in its history. Out of this team effort will come models, displays, research materials, and this epic painting we talked about. all designed to be given to the citizens of Plattsburgh to share with the nation as a reminder of our historic legacy. And then what would be tomorrow, as we record this on the 20th, on Sunday, November 21st, the public will be invited to an exclusive question and answer session with the conference participants. On this occasion, we'll announce a call for volunteers to join artist Dean Moser when he returns in December to recreate the action aboard the ships to be depicted in his painting. We want you to participate in this historic process. So Calvin and I donned our winter coats and came down here today to be a part of this great historical recreation. We've been thinking about the history of the War of 1812 for a long time, not only as a part of a unit here in the North Country, but as a team, Calvin and myself, believing that it's important to let people know just how important we think this historic battle was, and to recreate these golden moments so that people in history will be able to perhaps show this video at this new interpretive center that is planned for right across Route 9 at the old stone barracks on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base, itself a tremendously historic area in the North Country. We'll see what happens today. I have a lot of questions based on this news release. Calvin and all has already talked to Dean Moser. I think Calvin told me they boiled down 2,000 pages, huh? At least 1,000 pages of information into 20 pages? Boy, I'll tell you, there's got to be smoke coming from those 20 pages, because a great deal has been written about the Battle of Plattsburgh, including Theodore Roosevelt's account, which Assemblyman Chris Ortloff has read on many occasions as we commemorated the Battle of Plattsburgh Day here over the past several years. I'm excited about being here today. We're the first ones aboard because we just wanted to get here early to lay the groundwork and let you know what the back of the gym looks like, and hopefully inside, well over 3,000 square feet, as they lay out a map and a grid and actually recreate the Battle of Plattsburgh. We'll see what transpires, and you'll join us through the cameras of Hometown Cable to see what it's all about right here in our little corner. Well, just as Calvin and I were going to go out for a second breakfast, a couple of people showed up. Colonel Sands, how are you? How are you doing?
Sir, how are you?
We're just great here today. This is kind of exciting. You guys have been here for a couple of days getting ready on the inside.
That's right. What we're trying to do is replicate the battle in miniature. And when you get inside, you're going to see two fields of activity, one set to one scale, which is the greater bay and part of the lake, and model ships to fit the size, which are about the size of my hand. And then on the other part of the gym floor, you're going to see 1 square nautical mile of the actual spot where all the ships came together to fight the naval battle of Plattsburgh. And there you're going to see models that are about that big. And we're going to walk through, minute to minute, exactly what happened according to the 5 scholars that are here today, putting all of our knowledge together at one time in one place, and walking it through to see just exactly what's true and what isn't about the accounts.
This is kind of a dumb question, but isn't this exciting for you?
Well, I mean, this is a chance of a lifetime, isn't it, to do something like this? Because, I've read everything under the sun, and a lot of it's very contradictory, because people have different reasons to protect their own reputation, or they want to get some particular point across. So over the years they embellished things, and there's no one around to contradict them. And so you read the embellishments and then you begin to believe it. So you've got to be very careful about history. And today the 5 of us that are here are probably going to have different points of opinion on various aspects of the battle. And we'll all bring our bits of proof with us.
Now, we've already got some miniature boats.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, the artist who's going to do the large painting of the battle, do a significant painting, Dean Moser, had the boats made up just for this purpose.
What do you think about all this, William?
This is tremendous. This is tremendous. As a lifetime hobby in military history and the history of northern New York, this is a fantastic opportunity. With the 5 scholars and Colonel Fitzsimmons here putting this whole program together, I wouldn't miss this morning for a life.
Yeah, Calvin says, do you think we want to take our weekend and go over there to the base? I said, You know, where's my shoes? And when do we start? What an opportunity, because we've talked about this Battle of Plattsburgh for so long. We're trying to gear up at a fever pitch toward an event in the not too far distant future when we can really turn this interpretive center on the other side of the road into something truly amazing and let the rest of the world know that we think this is a significant event in Plattsburgh history. So to get this group together is truly amazing to me. How did this happen? How did we arrive at today?
First of all, I can't believe Calvin would have said that.
I didn't say it that way.
Well, he didn't say it quite that way.
Well,
Because he knows I jealously guard my weekends as I work many hours at all the things that I do.
I
But
could be here with them or without them.
okay. But we're here in any case.
well, Dean Moser, who's the artist, is trying to recreate in the early period of American history the great naval battles. And he's an illustrator in the school of Rockwell and Wyatt. And he's already done John Paul Jones during the Revolutionary War in England with the famous Battle of the Bonhomme Richard. And he's recently done Perry on Lake Erie. And he's also done Mobile Bay. And he has a sponsorship with some very significant organizations like the Navy League that are helping him because they really think that this should be brought forward into the consciousness of today, which is rather lost to history. And as we know, most of our kids in school no longer get the history that you and I got when we were there in those days, just the very few years ago that it was, right?
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, right. So, we've got to look at a new media to transmit this information because it's vital information to their future, to know where they came from. And we're going to use television, and we're going to use a great big mural painting here at our new museum, that we're building on the old post, Gordon.
It's truly amazing to get people of this caliber into our town to do something like this. It's got to be a real coup, right, Billy?
This is only a start.
Yeah.
This is only a start.
Well, what a
With
start.
the museum that's going to be put in on the old base. And last night we sat down the education committee for the Battle of Plattsburgh Association, and we are beginning work on lesson plans and criteria to meet the standards in New York State to take a look at the history of this area. And so we have a joint venture between teachers and those of us who are into the history of the area to start putting this together, to meet criteria like in the fourth grade and so forth.
Each year this plan is going to grow.
Yes.
But you have to lay the groundwork.
Yes,
You
yes.
can't just get a few good old boys in a room and say, I guess we'll have a party next year. You really have to plan, don't you?
Yes, indeed. And the plans are large. The plans are 15 years long, as a matter of fact. And we're going to have probably a dozen or so buildings by the time we're finished. Some of them will be things like the Earth Fort, Fort Monroe. Fort Morrow will be rebuilt here on the
I
post.
want to hear more about that. I've been hearing rumblings this week. I
Yeah.
like that.
Well, that's one of the things we can do in a rather short period of time. It doesn't take a lot of money and a great deal of effort, however, and that is to find out exactly what Morrow looked like. It was a dirt readout,
Yeah.
So we think that right next to where the stone barracks is, we could have a site where we can bring in truckloads of dirt, and with good research can rebuild it to look like it did during the battle. Of course, it was there on the post, but it was about 500 yards from where we're going to construct it. In addition to that, we're looking for reproduction guns or original guns, and we think we can find them, even here in the state of New York, to fill that fort. And we'd like to build the blockhouse, a building next to it, which was one of the two blockhouses that was towards the center of the city. So it'll be living history, and that's the important thing, Gordy. It's hands-on history where people can actually walk around and see these things rather than just view them through dusty glass.
Another item that we're working on in this 15-year period is the 140-foot brig, the USS Saratoga. And if anyone has ever been to Erie, Pennsylvania, and seen the USS Niagara that sailed on Lake Erie, just the having the opportunity to walk on the brig and walk below the deck and see how people lived in those years and so forth. This is what we're looking for with the building of the USS Saratoga. And one of the 5 scholars here today will be the captain of the USS Niagara.
That's kind of neat.
Yeah.
Talk about bringing history alive. That's a great idea. And, you know, if we can get the general public interested, if we can create this passion, I can already feel the ripples spreading out around the North Country and into other areas. It will be good for tourism, and it certainly will be good for history itself because, as you pointed out, Dave, a lot of people disagree on some of the smaller details of what happened way back when. And if we can put a finger on that, it'll help for future generations.
Yeah, I love the disagreement.
Yeah.
You know, the more we disagree, the more we discuss it, the more it gets into the news and the more people understand what events took place here. You know, Valcour in the Revolutionary War was pivotal to the history of this country. There may not have been a country without Valcour if they couldn't have stopped that movement south. Here in Plattsburgh, 40 years later, we have the same situation all over again. The same enemy is going to indeed divide what country exists at that time. It was stopped here. If it hadn't been stopped here, the history of this country would have been totally different.
You know, and listening to Assemblyman Chris Ortloff talk about his dream for that interpretive center and that entire area over by what we call the old base and the stone barracks, he would like to see functions connected with all of America's military history there.
Surely. You know, Lake Champlain starts, what I always call the road to war is Lake Champlain.
Yeah.
It starts with the French and Indian War and it ends with the Cold War here on this post. And so the interpretive center will have segments in it through that timeline in history. And for instance, one of the rooms we're going to have in the new museum is a POW room, because the War of 1812 was about prisoners of war, the impressment of seamen. In addition to that, in 1812, 2 years before this battle, 2 American ships were captured by the British in Canada when they were trying to a little soiree into Canada, and those crews and officers were imprisoned during the entire war, 2 years in Canada. They were POWs from here. One of them was Sidney Smith. And then the 2 vessels that were captured will reappear in this battle 2 years later, renamed for the British.
And if this generates more interest in American history, so be it. If these scholars here today will cause more scholars to come and visit us at time, I'm sure you wouldn't mind sitting at a round or square table with people like that anytime.
Well, you know, one of the things we want to do, too, we're trying to get the Prevost family, Sir Christopher and Lady Prevost in England, to give us the family papers and the artifacts of the family. And if we can provide an adequate room in the museum that's got the right temperature and humidity for these very fragile artifacts that they have now in England, we could possibly bring them here and turn it into the Prevost Library, where people can come and read the papers of both.
You're warming up the old blood now, boy.
Well, both he and his father were involved very much in both wars. His father was a major general in the Revolutionary War, and he was a lieutenant general in the War of 1812. All these family papers exist, and no one has ever seen them. They're in Portugal.
I thought didn't you go to Portugal?
I did, yes. And that's where we located the secret order that put this whole thing into operation. That could all be here, and we could have scholars coming here and studying the Prevost papers, which they've never done.
You know, it's pretty neat that within the last few years they've come over here to join us, and the McDonough family has come to join us for our celebrations, and boy, has that added something, right, Bill?
The Colonel mentioned the other day, one of the things that we're really looking at in the museum is hands-on activity by the children, interactive exhibits. He's seen that in Europe. I've seen that in Europe. We've both been to the Imperial War Museum, and the interactive exhibits there. And I saw groups of children being brought through those museums over there, and to a much greater extent than what I've seen in this country. And so this is what we're working toward.
Yeah, hands-on is very important. That's how you get the kids, you know, that's how you generate this passion in future generations, by getting the little kids involved.
Oh, absolutely. You know, they watch television now, And television tells them a lot of things, but I wonder if it tells them who they are and where they came from. And that's what you have to know in order to where you're going, you know. And they have a rich history that they should know what their forefathers did. And we're blessed right here in Plattsburgh because such great activities took place by the people who lived here. Some of them. Now, there were others who were smugglers, Gordy,
Oh, yeah, I
who
know.
built the confiance for the
Yeah.
British and who fed the British Army during the war and who spied for the British during the war. But that's all part of history, too.
But you know, we're able to dredge back some of these beautiful pieces of our history for every one of our celebrations. We're going to have this painting by 2000,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
So what an addition that will be to the 2000 commemoration. And who knows what else we might be pulling out of the woods or out of the lake by then, right?
Well, you know, there are other things in the lake, too.
Oh,
And
gosh.
we think we have some great finds to come in the near future to add to the collection.
You know, it's nice to see cooperation across the lake, you know, hands across the water. The Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, I haven't been over to see the confiance or the confiance anchor in a while, but I understand progress is being made toward restoration.
The anchor's coming back, and it'll be here next September the 11th for the recommissioning here on site. And we hope that the President's going to go into the City Hall. But, you know, what will things look like by next fall? Maybe we've made some great progress, and we'll do something else with it. But whatever we do, it'll be here on that day.
That's one of the reasons Calvin and I feel so strongly about all of this, because we know that standing here today, we're making history, and that sometimes some of those kids we've talked about who were kids long after we're gone will be able to watch this video and say, wow, they really had a dream back there in 1999 as the century turned around. So that's one of the reasons we like to do this kind of thing.
Certainly, certainly.
Well, let's get inside after they all get here and unlock the door, and we'll see that big grib nap and have some fun.
Okay, Gordy.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Now, as you can easily see, we're inside the recreation area on the former new Plattsburgh Air Force Base, and wow, this is amazing. Assemblyman Chris Ortloff, what have we got here?
I'm speechless.
This is incredible.
We are. Let's orient ourselves. We're looking at Plattsburgh Bay here. We are. Let's say our eyes are at about 2,000 feet altitude. Imagine we're in an airplane flying at 2,000 feet, and over here is the Saranac River. The red structures are the British batteries on the north side of the river. The blue structures are Fort Moreau, Fort Scott, and Fort Brown, with American batteries in them. And then out in the bay, way over there, you can see the pale blue, which represents Cumberland Head. And in the middle of the bay, the little blue models are the American ships, and off there, just beyond the point, are the red models representing the British ships. And down here is Crab Island. And here we have Cliff Haven down in this area right here. It's all laid out for us.
Isn't this amazing to get scholars here together to have a serious discussion about what history was all about? This is part of your dream, isn't it?
Well, it really is, and this is like a big board game, except that it's serious scholarship. We have the leading scholars in the world on this period of military history and on this battle. Two gentlemen from Texas A&M University. We have the captain of the brig Niagara, the replica of Perry's ship in the Battle of Lake Erie. He's the leading expert in the world on the art of sailing these ships. We have the National Park Service's black powder expert, whose expertise enabled them to put these arcs on the bay here?
Right.
That represents the limit of these shore batteries. But unless you've got someone who knows the mechanics of black powder artillery, you can't begin to do that. And if you can't do that, you can't answer the question of whether McDonough was or was not under the fire of the shore batteries. You see, the British out there, after they lost the battle, they got court-martialed. And in their defense for having lost the battle, they said, well, we were outnumbered. And they said, well, how could that be? Your guns and the guns in the American ships, you had the superiority. And they said, no, but we're counting the shore batteries that the Americans had that added to the strength of the Americans. Well, this first little blue curve out here represents the effective range of the 24-pound guns here at Fort Scott. And as you can see, they don't begin to go to where McDonough's fleet is, putting the lie to the British officers' defense that they were outnumbered. They were not outnumbered. The shore batteries didn't enter into it at all. McDonough was well beyond their range and also beyond the range of the British shore batteries.
You said we've already started to rewrite history today. What does that mean?
Well, as you know, in 1997, divers found one of the anchors from the flagship Confiance. We all saw it. We brought it out of the bay. It's now in Virgins in conservation. Well, the divers not only found it, but they used the global positioning satellite to measure and record the precise location where that anchor came from. By putting that little dot on the map, and the man in the plaid shirt there is Bill Van Stockham, one of the divers, and he is standing at just about exactly the location where he found the anchor. He's showing the scholars right now. This is the spot. As you can see, it's behind the blue ships. It's behind the American line. Well, the British didn't get behind the American line. So what that tells us is that when scholars have thought that the American line began at the tip of Crab Island and went kind of northeasterly over toward Cumberland Head, obviously, now that we know where that anchor was found, we know that that couldn't have been where the American fleet was. And as they begin working today, you're going to see them position McDonough's ships farther back toward us to account for the fact that the British anchor was found where it was.
I'm sure similar things have been done before, but I've never seen anything like this myself, ever.
No, I haven't either. And Addie Shields is with us here, the Clinton County historian. And this moment this morning is the first time Addie's seen this map, and it's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Isn't this
Addie?
amazing, Addie?
Absolutely mind-boggling. And children must be able to see this. And as Chris has said, there's a desire to keep this for some time so that we can get all of the students in Clinton County. And this will be difficult to do because you have to have time to arrange for buses. But this, absolutely, I've never seen it like this. And it's always been confusing for children to know how far these guns could shoot out and what the range was. And here it all is. Just amazing. I'm speechless.
The perspective it gives us, standing right here, just in the few minutes we've been here, I've got a whole new perspective on the Battle of Plattsburgh.
Well, could I make a suggestion? I don't know how your knees are, Calvin, but if you could take the camera down.
I have a feeling we're going to find out.
If you take the camera down from 2,000 feet where we're standing now, right, if you could get it down right to ground level and look out at those boats, I think you'd get an idea what it would look like if you were on the shore standing instead of flying in an imaginary airplane as we are. You know, you look out, those ships look pretty tiny from up here, but when you're down on the shore, just as it is when the moon looks so huge when it rises and then so tiny at the top of the sky, you get some sense of what, imagine you're a 10-year-old child now down here along the shore looking out at those ships and then looking beyond them at the British coming. I would imagine it was quite frightening to realize that between you and the devastation on those red ships in the distance, your only defense is these tiny little blue ships out there.
It's amazing. You, as a child, how early did you know about the War of 1812? Can you remember when you first heard about it?
I think we first learned about the Star-Spangled Banner and Fort McHenry and how the British burned the White House and the Capitol, and that's about all I ever remembered as a child. What's really remarkable is that I grew up 50 miles from Plattsburgh and didn't know the first thing about the Battle of Plattsburgh until I moved here as an adult in 1981.
In 1961, when I came here, I started to learn very quickly. When I heard about all these things, I got one of those embryonic metal detectors and started walking through the woods. and trying to get my kids interested in the history of this region. And now,
Well, Addie grew up in Clinton County. When did you learn about the Battle of Plattsburgh, Addie?
Oh, well, rural schools, our wonderful old school teachers. And it was verbal, and they had very little, there was a great deal of tradition, underground slavery and all of that. And all of the time that a rural school teacher has to fill, remember, they're there from 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and all the books didn't provide everything. And there was, just as when we found the John Townsend Adams, the underground railroad site, old Johnny Banker said, well, of course, all us old folks knew this. But what intrigued me about this is always we've been into cost effectiveness. Anybody who survives is efficient dollar-wise. And I look at what's laid out here and how that we, right here in Clinton County, could never have afforded, when I see the people that are here and the salaries involved, if Chris hadn't taken the leadership. And we got state and federal money here. And therefore, we're very indebted to Chris Artlaw for this. We never could have done this. Look at the cost of the layout, and look at the men in their stocking feet.
Right.
I wondered, how did they do this?
Well,
Just amazing.
let me tell you something that is going to really impress you, Addie. Every one of these scholars, this fellow here in the blue is Jim Bradford from Texas A&M University. He and all these other scholars are doing this for nothing. This is entirely all donated time.
But you see, it's so
and
thrilling. It's amazing.
Oh, it surely is.
Absolutely. It's
And don't
amazing.
think that they're just donating their time here today. They've spent weeks, in some cases months, preparing for today, doing the research, coming here, listen, children, doing their homework. So, because this is the exam here today. These are experts, but experts get to be that way by studying, and they've been doing their homework for 2 and sometimes 3 months, so that when they come here today, they are prepared to answer questions. They're prepared to argue with one another and arrive at a consensus. I want to also point out the blue board here, the blue insulation board that forms the land around the bay, that was all donated by J. Ward and Ward Lumber Company. And the paper on the floor that we couldn't do this without, that was all donated by International Paper Company. And this space here and the heat to heat us was all donated by the Plattsburgh Air Base Redevelopment Corporation.
Gardy, you weren't with us, but this man got us out of bed at 7:30 in the morning in, I believe it was December of 96 and again in January of 97, along with Dennis Lewis, and who was one of our who studied out all of these things, was an authority. So this has been a rolling affair, a part of his brainchild, right?
You bet.
And it
It's
continues
taken-
to grow, doesn't it? Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it continues to grow.
I don't know whether, I guess we can't do this. I mean, it's just too much space to have this as a permanent exhibit. But Dean Moser was telling me yesterday that there is a concrete paint now that lasts 10 to 15 years. Perhaps we can do this outdoors on a concrete pad at the interpretive center. Actually, paint this on the concrete and have little models laid out so that, at least in good weather, school children can come, and adults as well as we are, and look at this for the future.
And as Calvin and I discussed not only this morning, but as soon as we heard about this activity this weekend, what we're doing and putting this on videotape for posterity will aid in that education process. For the young
Absolutely, absolutely. It's you're going to see, and it's going to take a long time. It's going to be very tedious because they're going to go step by step by step through 10-minute blocks of time, beginning at 7 o'clock in the morning, when Downey's little gig came around the head to reconnoiter the American line before the battle, right up until the end of the battle itself at 10 or 11 or 11:30 in the morning. It's going to take 9 hours today just to do that working out, and they're beginning it now. Tomorrow, the Sunday program will be geared toward people who don't have 9 hours to spend, and they'll walk through it much more quickly, having arrived at the consensus on what really happened. On Sunday, the scholars will be speaking with one voice, explaining what happened, and that'll be as a result of their hashing it out today.
You know, and one of the reasons for doing, there are a lot of reasons for doing this. Number one, to create that interest in history. Number two, to define what really happened. Thousands and thousands of pages have been written about the War of 1812 and quite a few about this specific Battle of Plattsburgh. But memory is a very tricky thing. And as Dave Fitzsimmons told us at the outset, standing out back in the back of this building before we came in, everybody who writes history has a bias of one kind or another,
sure.
and especially back in those days.
You bet.
And, you know, they all had their own axes
Yes, they did.
to grind and
Yes, they
oxes
did.
to gore. So.
Even within the American fleet. Now, McDonough was very displeased with Robert Henley, the captain of the Eagle, because Henley opened fire before he was supposed to. Henley cut his anchor line and drifted back behind Saratoga and left Saratoga to come under the fire of not one but two British ships. And I forget the word. Do you remember, Addie, the word he used to describe Henley in his account? It wasn't kind, anyway. But I'm sure Henley, who later had a distinguished naval career and rose to the rank of admiral, remembered things a little different in his memoirs.
Oh, and you can understand
And
why.
even the British in their defense, all of the British accounts have their defense, don't they? Their
sure.
defense and explanation. Everybody covers themselves. Isn't this true?
Well, of course they do, all throughout history.
You know,
But
it's
so-
it's human nature. I'm sure the fellow who missed the saber-toothed tiger on that hunt, did the same thing.
You got that right. But you know,
Honey, I threw my spear, but he ducked,
but as I look at this,
But we're going hungry tonight.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
as I look at this, I can picture myself teaching social studies in a grade school
Yeah.
and bringing every one of my kids and their parents here to watch this process. It grieves me that it takes so long to squeeze people into getting this passion for our own history. I know how you think about it day and night, and how hard you're working toward building this interpretive center here. And finally, once we have it, you know the old phrase, if you build it, they'll come. But
They will.
sometimes
They will.
you gotta wonder what it's going to take to develop this passion here in the North Country and elsewhere.
The
I think this
passion-
will help.
The passion's coming, Gordy. I can see it, and I know Addie can see it. You can hear it in her voice, and all over the county. People think this is a tremendous project. They're all behind it. And most folks don't even yet really comprehend how big it could be for us.
I mean, it's unusual. None of us in the North Country have ever seen anything like this, have we? Yeah,
never
we've had to
have.
go up to Fort Champlain to see our first layouts, and then our own in the interpretive center. But this one, with especially with the range, the lines of the range, how far the guns could, I think it's just wonderful.
Well, it's Providence that gave us this facility to do this today.
We were talking with Walter Ribka, who's the gentleman out here in the tan and green vest. He works at the center in Erie, Pennsylvania, and they have, of course, the recreation of the brig Niagara. And we were talking at breakfast today. How did the museum that he works at come into being? Well, the downtown of Erie, Pennsylvania was ripe for redevelopment. Sound familiar?
Doesn't
Plattsburgh,
it, though?
right?
Yeah, doesn't it?
There was a power station that was being retired by the power company that they wanted to give to the county. Sound like the base suddenly being available. And I was struck by the similarities between the way that developed and what we have. We wouldn't be talking about a Battle of Plattsburgh Interpretive Center in the old stone barracks if in 1993 the base hadn't been closed.
True.
We wouldn't be, I suppose we might be talking about it, but you know what I'm saying. And when Dennis Lewis said, now is the time to seize the opportunity to see to it that 1838 stone barracks, which Peg Byrne and, who else, Addie, and who else worked on getting that on the National Register back in the 70s? Helen Allen. And now those were people who had a vision of using that facility as a museum, but as long as the Air Force occupied the base and potentially had other uses for that building, it wasn't quite as urgent. All of a sudden, the base closed. It was going to be available. Dennis said, we've got to act now. He convinced me. Senator Stafford and I began to work on it, and here we are, talking about creating a world-class interpretive center at or around the stone barracks, and down here on the shore, bringing that ship, Saratoga, and rebuilding it and docking it right down here. Now, what are we doing here?
Based on the love,
Oh, we're
too.
putting flags
The
on
love
them.
and dedication. You know, I think of Loyal Smith, who was born in West Shazy, who was in '56, and following the Civil War, probably came into Plattsburgh to see a fair or something, and then went off and made money in the stock market and came back and gave us our city hall and our YMCA and helped the nuns to build the old Champlain Valley Hospital and so forth. I think of that as dedication and love, and there's been a lot of love in our area, a lot of anxiety, and one of the great things we do have is that 135-foot obelisk and that 22-foot eagle wing spread that actually is a beacon for us to tie this. And we are a little bit late in doing this, but how wonderful that we're doing it right now. It's been a long time coming.
Better late than never, I tell you. I
people-
can't wait to see what the next 10 years will bring, Chris, toward this
Our hands have been tied.
this idea.
Well, Gordy, we'll take Addie, and we'll walk up the gangplank on Saratoga, and they'll weigh anchor, and we'll unfurl the sails, and we'll sail across Plattsburgh Bay. And I predict that one day, very soon, I mean, time passes in an eye blink, right?
It does. Wait till
The
you
four
get
of
old
us
as
will
us.
be together, and Calvin will be there with his sea legs, and the camera going back and forth, and you're going to be saying, "Did you ever think we'd be out here doing this?" And I'll say, "Well, of course I did."
You know, Gordy, you have to have the right person in the right place. And as it was that Loyal Smith really brought us into our golden age with our wonderful government buildings. But beyond that, we have this man, you must forgive me for doing this, but we have this man in the state legislature with an overview. You know, everybody's where they are, just like a little child who comes to school. You've got that child and his parents. This man has the growth and the development that's come to him through the New York State legislature and also the federal, and being able to see what other people have done. It's wonderful that we have this arrangement, this person, to spearhead this.
And
We
it's
would
nice
never
to
had
have,
this if he hadn't, along with Dennis Lewis. Dennis had a dream. I'm not sure this man had his own dream too, but they gelled together. I'm just amazed. This is
There's a lot of-
mind-boggling.
There's a lot of frustration in the beginning, though, Chris, because when anybody develops a dream, you want to get there. You want to get from here to there as quickly as you
But
can.
how?
Suddenly you realize it's going to take a little time, but isn't it nice that you are generating support?
Well, thank you for asking it that way, because in a moment, as you were asking the question, I realized that what you're talking about is the importance of imagination.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
And maybe other animals can do that, I don't know, but I don't think they can. Everything we've all been taught is that the human being is the only animal who can imagine, who can see into the future. They're moving the ships now. Now imagine. And what I'm saying is,
Is that playing God or
if
what?
you
Go ahead.
can imagine something that you want or something you hope for, then you can hold that picture in your mind and overcome all those frustrations. But unless you can imagine the victory, the successful outcome of a project, you're going to give up. You have nothing to sustain you. And it's faith, it's imagination, it's being able to picture. How often do you hear people who are trying to teach people how to win an athletic event or whatever, is to imagine yourself at the finish line, imagine yourself scoring that goal, imagine yourself imagine that woman saying, "Yes, I'll marry you." You know, I mean, all of these things. I'm trying to relate to things that everybody has experienced. If you courtship, I mean, you see someone. I'm a man, so I saw a woman I wanted to be my wife. She didn't know I wanted to be her husband. I had to imagine that and keep that in my mind until I was able to convince her that, and boy, that wasn't easy, I'll tell you. I got a good deal there. You know what I'm saying. Now, we're imagining what we're going to be in 2014. Now, Calvin, you see Crab Island over there?
On the right-hand
Now,
side.
we know there's a monument. There wasn't one there in 1814, so it's not on this map. But my imagination The one picture that we're all working toward, in my mind, is on September 11th, 2014, where that monument is out in Crab Island. The Saratoga brought there and anchored offshore, ready to fire a 21-gun salute, and in comes a helicopter with the King of England and the President of the United States, and the flags go up the flagpole, and the British national anthem and the American national anthem, and they lay wreaths on that monument, and they commemorate this great event. And then we have celebrations here that evening and fireworks that evening, and the King and the President, and we have a great state dinner here to commemorate it, and military, and all of us, of course, will be there. And then a day and a half later, they fly off to Baltimore, and they do the same thing at Fort McHenry. Now, that's what I imagine, because if we do our work today, that will happen. It really was important. It really was worth having the heads of state of both these countries here, and if we do our work and build this center here, they will come, the King and the President and everybody else.
He's got me. He's got me convinced.
Note the overview. Note the overview this person had.
That's what it
None
takes.
of us, yes.
We have to. You have to have vision. If you don't have vision, you're trapped. You know, you're trapped
Right.
at a point in history, and I can't imagine what that would be like. We use. I don't know if it's for any special reason, but we use the word imagination a lot. I grew up in the golden age of radio, where when you listened to something on the air, you used your imagination to create the characters.
Sure. See it
I
on
would
the radio.
never, right? I would never take anything away from that wonderful medium, television. But every time you add a dimension, you, in some sense, you take it away.
Yeah.
And that's why,
Yeah.
when you and I curl up with that good book, whether it's a historical novel or a piece of fiction, that's why we go there
Yeah.
in our minds.
Yeah. Now look what they've done here. If I can interrupt, to go there in our minds. Now, based on, you heard me say a few minutes ago that the anchor was found, well, right between the feet of the two men standing on the paper now. And so based on that, which is an absolute fact, that is where that anchor was.
And you know, somebody didn't take it and drop it there. That's
No,
where it
you
ended
know,
up.
it had been in that muck for 185 years. And so the confiance had to be right about where Dean's right foot is. And as a result, they have moved now tentatively, I think they'll move them a little more again, the American ships. Eagle on the left, Saratoga, the larger one, and the three masts in the middle, and then Ticonderoga. And they're trying to locate Preble right now. Preble being the ship that's still out beyond the smallest one. But this is what this is all about today, is saying, well, what do we know, and how can we conform this little experiment to make sure that it is at least consistent with all the facts.
What a wonderful
There they go. They're picking up Preble now, and they're locating Preble, named after one of the great commanders of the early history of the United States Navy. They're still holding Preble in their hands, trying to figure out where to put it exactly.
This is a progress that'll take place all day. Now we started here at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. This will be an 8 or 9 hour project today, and then pick it up again tomorrow, which would be Sunday the 21st, and we're inviting people in from the general public and the media at 1 o'clock to ask questions. And who knows? It may not be the final word when we finish this weekend.
Well, I'm sure there will always be some who disagree, or we may turn up some new evidence in the future that we didn't know about.
You know, as a tourist attraction, how can we make, you know, this building, so what are they going to do with this building? Why can't we make this permanent? You know, if you went to Montreal or to Ottawa, there are always visible displays like this. Why can this not become permanent?
Well, as Chris said,
that's a problem,
and-
right?
as-
I think we've got several
possibly
ways to
not
do
in
it.
this building, but the idea of building it outdoors or in another kind of facility over near the Interpretive Center, I can see no reason why it couldn't.
We could certainly do this outdoors. I mean, there's no reason why, if it were outdoors and the finish were, such that it could be cleaned easily, that people couldn't walk all over it. I mean, this could be. You've seen. what am I thinking of? A hopscotch
certainly.
lines on
I know what
a
you mean.
playground.
Catch that.
Now they're moving Saratoga back. See, now they're disagreeing. And this is going to go on all day. They're going to
love
say,
it.
all right, what if this? And they're going to lay it out, and then somebody's going to say, well, that looks good, but that doesn't conform with some other fact. Okay, now we'll have to move it back. And you're going to see a lot of this back and forth all day. Tomorrow, the Sunday, of course, by the time folks see this program, it'll be past Sunday, I suppose, but on the Sunday program, they will again have all arrived at an agreement, and they'll be able to present to the public tomorrow. This is what we believe actually happened.
Give me an idea about what this painting's going to be like when it's finished, how big it will be.
I'm glad you asked that, because as
is
we've
the
talked here,
whole-
I've completely
whole
forgot
point
that
of
that's
this
the point of this.
exercise.
Well, Dean Moser, the artist who's in the striped shirt, has made it an absolute commitment that before he puts one bit of paint, touches one brush to his canvas, he's going to know that what he's painting is accurate. That when people see his painting, it isn't a romanticized vision of what happened. It's not an allegory for what happened. It's maybe less dramatic, but it's accurate. And the big part here on the bay is just for starters, when the ships of the two fleets close for the actual battle, then you'll see them move to the far end of the gym on the other square of paper with larger models, which you've already seen, I'm sure, with the decks and the guns and the masts and everything accurate. And they'll position those, they'll photograph those, and from one of those photographs, he'll start the painting.
We don't exactly know what perspective he's going to use yet.
No, we don't. I have a fairly good idea because they were checking it out yesterday, but it isn't. And of course that's his decision. He is the artist. He's not going to. He's abandoning artistic license in the sense that he's not going to make it up, but he also is retaining artistic pride of authorship in the sense that it's his decision.
Absolutely, and the fact
Yeah.
that painting is going to be around
Yeah.
for a long time to come.
Well, and this is something your viewers can look forward to now, because by the end of this program, as you stay here, you will at some point be able to put your camera right in the spot where Dean's eyes are, and if he decides today, and he very well may, that this is the view I'm going to paint, you can actually get your camera right down there and say, okay folks, what you're looking at now is what the painting will look like when it's
And
when
won't
it's
that be
complete.
interesting to compare the
Yes,
two?
it will.
We don't know
Certainly
how
will.
big the painting's going to be.
It's
Tremendous
going to be
vision there is
anywhere from 12 to 16 feet long and anywhere from 6 to 10 feet high, an entire wall. And then
will
there'll
we
be a
get it?
second one.
Will we get it?
Let me get to that in just a minute, because that's not entirely guaranteed yet. We're going to need some help from some local people.
Okay.
But there's also a second painting of McDonough, and that would be maybe 4 to 5 feet by 2 to 3 feet. This painting project is to capture a moment, not just a battle, but a moment in the battle, a particular time when the decision was made by the commander that led to victory. And that is probably the moment after McDonough has figured out how to wind his ship around, been knocked out twice, come to twice, had to be still groggy, had one of his best friends beheaded right in front of him, and literally holding the man's head in his hands. We would all be cracked up at that point. We wouldn't be capable of rational thought. McDonough he overcame all that adversity, he made the fateful decision, he brought his ship around, and then he began to fire again. But then the small painting of McDonough will be McDonough at that moment, as well as the whole fleet. Now, are we going to keep this painting? I believe we will, or I wouldn't have the faith that we talked about before. But we are going to have to pay the entire cost of this project, which amounts to $60,000 for almost 3,000 hours of the artist's time, for all these models which have already been built and paid for all of the painting and the time and things that we're going to get to keep. And at this moment, we are hoping that one or all of the banks in Plattsburgh, Burlington, the Champlain Valley will either join forces or one step forward to do it all themselves.
Great. Let me put a new battery in and we'll continue. Our batteries are refreshed as if they weren't already cranked up when we started today. You began to say to Addie a year ago couldn't have talked about this, right?
Yeah, you talk about the vision, and certainly Dennis had a vision, and I shared that, and a lot of people signed on to that vision last year. But what we're looking at here today wasn't part of that vision a year ago. We wouldn't have been able to say a year ago that this was going to happen because we didn't have a clue that Dean Moser even existed. He was still in Alabama and had not contacted us. He knew he was going to paint the Battle of Plattsburgh 5 years ago. But he did 3 works and finally got to the time to do this one, and then he contacted us. So from May to November, this has all come to us out of the blue, as it were. And I want to make the point to young people who may be watching, who will be in their 20s and 30s in 2014, and to people who, like me, hope we'll live that long, that what happens in 2014, I described the king and the president and all that, and that'll keep you going. But it may be completely different. Something even better may come along, like this. We have to be open, is what I'm trying to say. We have to nurture this project, but we can't try to engineer it too precisely, because if we aren't careful, we will preclude some of the best things that'll come down the pike, like Dean Moser. We've got to be open to that, and if somebody comes along with an idea we didn't plan for, we've got to have the will and, the attitude to say, sure, come on in. You can only make it better.
You put the bandwagon on the road and let he who wants to jump aboard, right?
Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to run over here, take my shoes off, and walk out on the paper.
We'll watch this whole thing happen. Thanks for starting it off for us. You too, Addie.
The other thing I wanted to say to you was that we owe a debt of gratitude to Thomas G. Ryan, who was the supervisor from the town of Black Brook, who in a meeting of the Board of Supervisors in March, I believe it's March of 1908, who stood before that group and said, we must build a monument to the soldiers and what happened in the Battle of Plattsburgh. And as a result of that, we have this 135-foot obelisk with the 22-foot eagle spread, the wing spread. Now, that man had vision. That was just one thing, and all of these other things, Chris just said, stay open.
It makes you want to live to be at least 100, doesn't it, Addie? It makes me feel that way anyway. Well, we're going to walk around, take some more pictures. You can see the guy with the whitest hair out there, who's probably not much older than I am, is my good friend Captain Frank Pabst. And we'll get a chance to talk with Frank and some of the other folks as our program continues on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base. As Dean Moser said a few minutes ago as an aside, as we were moving our cameras around the room, this is a dynamic. Things are going to change a great deal over the next 10 or 12 hours today and before things are resolved tomorrow. Our good friend Captain Frank Pabst is here, as I mentioned a few moments ago. Frank came in with a number of old maps and some navigational charts from Lake Champlain. Some are very historical. And as you look at this process, you can hear them talking about what's happening here and what was there back in 1812. And that's part of the problem of recreating something that happened that many years ago. What did the land look like? What did the lake look like? Was it higher or lower? Frank has his theories, and I'm sure all these historians have their theories as well, as they compare all the notes they can, compile everything they've ever read on this subject, and then try to come up with some consensus before the painting has begun. And as I said before, even now, after both of these days are finished, maybe this will still be a work in progress, and they'll make more decisions about what was very accurate back during the War of 1812. But it's an awful lot of fun just to listen to some of this conversation.
Debris fields 60 feet wide, 200 feet long, where we get magnetic activity with the magnetometer. A lot of magnetic activity. What I strongly suspect is we've got a time capsule from 1814
There are a lot of people who are experts on various aspects of American history, but being an expert doesn't mean you know everything there is to know. And that's why, no matter how much I studied any topic, I would be a little bit reticent about calling myself an expert because there is always so much to learn. As our viewers know, there are many artifacts still on the bottom of Lake Champlain. There's a work in progress to map that lake. What's going to happen when we find all those things on the bottom, if we ever do, I don't know. But each time something new is found, some little tidbit of history, maybe in some attic or cellar somewhere in the North Country, there might be an eyewitness account of this Battle of Plattsburgh that will add a dimension that we don't have today. But that's the excitement and the fun. It does take a vision, as Chris and Colonel Fitzsimmons and all the others have mentioned so far today, and in many other venues, and talking about what we want to do for the future. It does take vision. We can't get trapped in history today, otherwise we'll never understand where we've been. So listen to what's happening today and watch it and enjoy it through the camera's eye on Hometown Cable for our little corner.
Yeah, okay.
That's what this map is going from.
Yeah.
I'll be there. Becoming true.
Exciting. Come on in here.
Okay, here I am.
All right, Dean Moser, we have a Lake Champlain monster already underneath the waters of this represented Lake Champlain.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're creating another one here today, a wonderful monster.
Oh, thank you very much.
What do you think about this whole thing?
Well, fortunately, we have more sightings than Champlain.
Yes, I think
more verifiable. But what we're doing is taking all factual-based data we can possibly do, and plus some fixed point references, and I think we're going to get pretty close. I really do.
How did this whole thing evolve with you?
Well, when I started painting this series, I found out that almost all the visual record on these battles is based on early lithographs or early paintings of the event by people who not only weren't there, but didn't know much of anything about the battle.
Like a depiction of Jesus Christ, you know? The people who painted those pictures hadn't seen him.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But you know, it's interesting with Christ. There is a physical description of him, but few painters use that. But the point is to go back in the case of, all right, and you make assumptions that you never should make. John Paul Jones, for instance, they said, well, of course he had on his Continental Navy uniform. Well, that completely contradicts eyewitness accounts. And you get with the best scholars in the world, and you start to really peel away all this veneer of assumption, and you start to get down to the core truth of the matter. And then what I've also found, instead of working with scholars individually and asking them for their advice and so on, what I do with a group like this is I turn over artistic license. I put it on a shelf, and I say, all right, gentlemen or ladies, what are the facts? And what does your expertise tell you about what's going on here? And you get Walter, and he says, well, with the current running at a half knot, at this time, with the variable airs coming around the point, she's going to slip so far to leeway. And you use that on a fixed point reference, and if you can pinpoint that based on those facts, and you got to admit, nature's pretty solid when it comes to that sort of thing, and the eyewitness accounts on wind direction and the current's running in the lake, pretty fixed. So you take that and you're within just a few inches on this type of scale. And so you can start extrapolating out from there based on other eyewitness accounts of how far they were in line abreast, and they were 600 yards off the larboard quarter, you know, that sort of thing. You start taking those and building it, and you're starting to get a pretty good picture.
So you're making history today.
Yeah.
Have you done this kind of thing before in this big a scale?
No, I have some pictures of what I did at Lake Erie. And in Lake Erie, we covered an area about half this size because it was a running battle. It was two fleets that came down and then came sort of in line ahead for on an approach. And in the Battle of Lake Erie, the English fleet had hove to, and the American fleet came to them and then went into position. In this one, the Americans are at anchor, at spring anchor, which of course was a crucial element here. It's how the British came in and approached and ended up where they ended up that's going to tell us where give us a really good idea of distance, time, speed. A time motion study is what we're talking about. And the only way you can really do that is if you talk to the scholars individually, you'll get 5 different opinions. And then it leaves my poor cranium to kind of come up to a compilation. But when you get them together and you start saying, well, no, and this, and that, and the other, you'll get permutations that you'd never get otherwise. And so this is a dynamic process. And I've been very fortunate. I've had universities ask me for my research material when I get done because they feel it is a viable research document when it's completed.
You think there'll be a true consensus by tonight?
I've always gotten a consensus. These are very reasonable people who respect each other's strengths and weaknesses. Nobody out there is an all-around technical expert on the battle. But everybody has areas of expertise and pieces of information that fit on the puzzle.
You don't have the Battle of Plattsburgh already in that beautiful artist's mind of yours? Can you see anything about your final picture right now in your mind?
Sure. Sure I can.
Like what?
Well, the reason I go up on a high elevation for my paintings of these battles is because that's the human element. That's the human drama. Ships don't win battles. It's the people aboard the ships that win the battles. And McDonough, in this case, changed history. And so what I'm interested in is, how did he get there? What did he have to go through? What was the rest of the crew like? You know, there are going to be 300, 350 figures visible in this painting. And each one's going to have on a specific uniform. Each one's going to have on a specific duty. We're going to try to get down to where they were at a given point in time, where the casualties were, how they would have lain on deck based on grape shot and all the other things, what kind of damage we're looking at. All you start putting together this gigantic jigsaw puzzle. And by the time you get down and everybody looks at it and says, yeah, that's as close as you're going to get.
You know, I think many of our viewers will be astounded at how much work you're going to put into this finished product. Do you feel driven to do that kind of thing?
This is my legacy, you know, to the...
It's nice to have one, isn't it? And to know what it is before you expire.
Yeah, I would like to notice other people notice it before I expire too. And it's catching on. I mean, I don't want to make this look like a one-man band. This is a team effort.
Oh, sure.
I'm the painter guy that tries to put all this information and tries to coordinate, you know, getting people up here. I mean, just trying to get schedules for these folks here is took me quite a while to do that. Today's duck soup compared to that, but this is the people that knows what they're doing. And I'm going to ask you. I'm going to have to leave in just a second because they're starting to coalesce, as you can see.
You want to be there.
Well, I wanted to give them about an hour to walk around and sort of understand I'd say the lay of the land, but the lay of the water, and get comfortable with the scale, and then start talking to. I mean, Frank just gave us some great information about how the current roils around coming up that way in its direction and speed, and how it's going up the lake and what direction and speed. And he'd know.
He knows. He's such a good friend, and he's been on this lake for so many years.
But Walter knows exactly how these vessels will react in those conditions. And there's nobody in the world that knows more than he does. So he's absolutely critical to understand where Confiance crossed to make the leeway to get to the point where she was. So that's what we need to know. We can construct an awful lot of the entire from that. So right now we're doing a pivotal point of where she must have been to round the head to get where she ended up.
We love to watch it evolve. This may be the last chance we get to see a large group of people walk on water.
Yeah, well, and I know that we're rolling, but you've got that lift over there is for you to use. And you can get up almost to the ceiling and shoot down if you want to.
Down. Dean, we'll watch you do it. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again before we're through.
Yes,
okay. All right, we're right in the middle of Lake Champlain, but we're in a dry area, I think, because we got gym floor underneath our feet. But we're listening to a conversation with Professor Jim Bradford from Texas A&M, our friend Captain Frank Pabst, and Assemblyman Chris Ortloff here. And these conversations will give us a little bit of a background on how these people feel about what happened.
So it's, and then you've got the problem, of course. Cranium, the Confiance is the worst sailor in terms of how close you can get to the wind. The other two can do probably, and I'd ask Walter on this. Walter's the one who really knows, but I'd say 15 to 20 degrees.
Off the wind?
Yeah. But Walter knows. He sails these kind of vessels. He's sailed them all.
Two conditions I've noticed here. You can have a wind direction change from Plattsburgh Bay to the main lake.
Yes, and that's why we've taken that into account, because you got to say you made the decision looking at the wind here, and as I say, you're estimating it looking at the pennants on the American ships, and you're saying what's the wind in there? Because it will also be somewhat channeled here around the head. Even everybody, and when they say a north wind, you've got to take that. I don't know what you got to take that. I won't say with a grain of salt, but when you're sailing in here, they come up with a rough approximate.
Yeah.
The best they're going to come up with is quartering. They're not going to come in with an exact figure. So that's what causes you. That's why you got to put an arc on here and then put your arc down there and say, here's what's possible.
I mentioned to David and Walter, I've got a 40-foot diesel in the water, ready to go. If the group decides they want to go out and get a physical handle on it, we could go out and do it.
Now, one of the things interesting is the question: is the water? Is the water? Would you think about the same clarity today as then? I mean, I know that I never want to say anything good about the zebra mussels, but the zebra mussels,
they haven't had a major effect yet.
Here, okay, because they will actually clear, the water.
I see that on the Erie Canal. I mean, you can actually see into the Erie Canal now, where years ago it had the viscosity of light pea soup.
Yeah, and it really, they do change because they are eating at the bottom of the food chain, but they'll
You've got
filter.
one factor that I don't know if anybody's considered is the depth of Lake Champlain.
Yeah.
A quick synopsis. In 1936, the riverbed elevation at St. John, Quebec, up in the Richelieu River, was 83-point-something feet, 83.6, I think. In 1972, we opened up our sewer plant. We had a 101.4 flood, and the riverbed elevation shot at the same benchmark that they did in 1936, showed a 93.2 reading, meaning 10 feet of overburden had plugged the Richelieu River. Now, what I suspect is, and there's two reasons. At Valcour Island in Sloop Cove, there's a number of caves on the southern wall of Sloop Cove. 15 feet inside a cave, it was 5 feet underwater, we found a 1774 Brown Bess musket. Now, there was a skirmish at the northeast corner of Valcour Island in the Battle of 1776. There was a small amount of fire. We found two 37-pound mortar shots there. And what I'm thinking is that the lake originally, maybe in 1776, the lake might have been as low as 85 feet. In 1814, you might have been looking at a 90-foot lake elevation, which would move the shoals. It would move the shoals out, and it would definitely affect the.
But now, if you look at the modern chart, what he's done is he's put in the 4-foot line, and there's another piece that comes out like this that's at the 8-foot.
Yeah.
But after that, it does drop off pretty.
Oh yeah.
That's a pretty sharp
you'll
drop
go like
off.
40 feet. You see a picture on a sonar, and you can see the wall. It's almost a 30-degree angle.
Well, when I was up here in April, you could see that in the color of the water.
Yeah.
I mean, it was clearly observable. So I guess the point I'm making is, even if we did have a different water level at that time around Cumberland Head, it's not going to be a huge difference.
It'd
for
move
sailing
maybe 50
purpose.
to 75 feet.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is then you could go closer to it than you could now, because it's still dropped off.
Yeah.
In other
You
words,
could run the edge of the shoal as
you could
they
run.
indicated.
That's right, and that's what they always said they were doing. What I was saying was impossible is when they talked about rounding the head and running the edge of the shoal, or they call it hugging, were the words they used. That's really impossible because you couldn't sail. When they said hugging, they didn't mean as close to the shoreline as the draft of the ship allowed. They meant as close to the shoreline as wind conditions allowed, which is slightly different. Yeah.
Of course, the wind was setting them off the shoal coming around, but
well, that's right. Yeah, and that's the point. And then how quick can you make the turn? And then what happens? And the wind is
hitting you in the face.
Yeah. So one of the points is at one point they discussed hugging the shoal, and they thought they'd be able to fire down the American ships, but out of range of the Americans. Not true, because they can't get that close over.
They couldn't get any deeper into the north.
Right, exactly. But it's also clear by one of the good things here, and this is the problem with the after action reports, is the Downey claimed that his ship set afire by shot from land. That's what he claims. Well, because of course what he's doing in here is he's saying we didn't. Yeah, I didn't lose a ship-to-ship battle. What I have lost here is I had all these land forces firing on me too. But see, that's what those arcs are out there.
Yeah.
Drawn.
So far out of range.
You're way out of range. That's right.
There's no one left on Cumberland Head.
Yeah. No. So, I guess what my point is, and this is what you always have to watch, is if you get somebody who just says, all right, we got the documents, we can chart them. You can't really, because the person who draws them hugging the shoreline and thinks it means I'll get the map, there's the chart, there's the shoreline, or the person who accepts this view that they were within range, you got to say the guy's lying in his teeth. Because if you want to accept that we got fired on and got set ashore by shot from shore, so you got to move the whole thing way over, and it's just impossible. And he's making that up to cover himself, as you say.
Who's going to question it?
Well, of course, he's
not realizing it was going to come to a court martial.
Well, no, but this is in the court martial that he says it. See, the point is it's in a court martial, and quite frankly, when you say who's going to question him, what I would say is he's being the court martial is naval officers. These guys are just as interesting as in blaming it on the Army.
Oh yeah.
As saying, well, we didn't lose to the American Navy, because there's also this implication of this is a Prevost's fault, because if he had carried on as the plan called with the more or less coinciding attack, then he'd have gotten rid of the American batteries.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, had the Army done the job it was supposed to, the batteries wouldn't have been there. They wouldn't have been the ones that set my ship afire. My ship wouldn't have been afire, and I would have been able to handle the American Navy. So that's what you're basically getting yourself off the hook. So, but I think you got to just discount that's what I'm saying, because you chart it out and nothing fits. I mean, when I say nothing fits, I'm talking about the coming around his own testimony. Coming around and seeing the end of the American line in line with the mouth of the river, and you got to assume he can tell the mouth of the river.
Professor Bradford, I'm getting the impression, and first of all, welcome to Plattsburgh. We're so glad to have you here. With all the studying you've done of this battle and many others, I have the feeling that the jury's still out until this day is over, and maybe after that.
Well, that's one of the things that I think is important about what Dean Moser does, is he comes in and says, let's gather all of the records. Now let's see how they match. But what he does, which is a little different than historians like me, is he says, let's chart this out. Let's see how this is, going to work. And then you bring in a guy like Walter Ripka, who has sailed all of these types of vessels. So, Walter really knows what they will do.
So with that
sure.
finding, just thinking of sailing, you've got the wind behind you.
Yep.
You're steaming along in great shape. If he were to have sailed down to here, to this point, and we'd have been in line with the mouth of the Saranac, and then you thought, if the steeper angle that you get here, the better your wind pickup is going to be.
Yes.
Oh, no, it isn't.
Not,
You're going to be sailing more
not
directly
really.
into
You're going to be more directly into it, and you're going to have more trouble.
Unless he thought he could come in and attack.
Yeah,
If
but
he
he
didn't-
doesn't. He doesn't have that in any of the reports, though.
If he'd come in over here and then attacked over.
Yeah. But that would have had him basically sailing across the front of the American line, which he specifically talks about not doing because the alignment of the gunboats and the direction which they're firing. He specifically talks about he's going to hug the shoal, and he makes it sound like he's just coming in here making a hard right. If you read the report, which isn't going to happen.
I've read the report.
Yeah, it's
But
not
it was
going.
a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, on the airplane up here, I refreshed my memory with reading it. So.
Well, what do you hope? What do you hope to add to what you already know before we're through today?
Well, I'd like to answer such questions as, okay, did he try to? I think he tried to do the impossible, but in other words, he set up a plan that, considering the wind conditions and so forth, was impossible to accomplish. That the ships could not sail where he wanted them to. It's the old thing. It looked good on paper when he started south. Started south up the lake, so to speak, and but it was really impossible to make this and see to what degree that's it. And of course, he has rather inexperienced sailors. A lot of his are, and then I like to see exactly where were they when the firing began, and then you've got this problem of putting out the spring lines to make the turn and so forth, which. I'd like to see where exactly he tried that. I mean, this is an interesting battle in a couple of ways. The British Navy studied this battle for about 100 years, but they didn't call it the Battle of Plattsburgh. They called it the Battle of the False Nile, because what they did was they paired this with the Nile, and essentially these are your object lessons on how to fight a fleet at anchor and how to place your ships. See, the French screwed up at Aboukir Bay in that the British fleet was able to double them. It was able to get inside of them, while here they couldn't. So they've got these two different battles. Now the Americans don't even look at that. When you look at the American accounts and so forth, what they find as the lesson is, here's a commander who has prepared for all contingencies, and the spring lines is the classic example of it. But that he's got his other vessels in a position so that they can meet a attack from one of two directions. If the British, how they try to do it. So the two navies for 100 years studied the battle, drawing essentially two different lessons because it's what they wanted to look for in history.
As I recall, Pring originally was the commander. Am I right or wrong? Or he was supposed to be commander. He developed a battle plan knowing the lay of the land, and Downey came in and changed the battle plan, and they were fighting. Pring had to fight Downey's battle plan.
Oh, I'm embarrassed now. It wasn't Pring. It wasn't Pring. Who was the commander? There was the original commander that he changed. I don't remember his name. Yeah, it wasn't Pring.
There was an original commander, though.
Right. See, Pring had been in command the year before, and he'd commanded the raid that came up here. So he's the one who's familiar with the site. And they sent this other guy in when they decided to beef up the forces and decided they were going to execute this. They wanted a more senior officer. And so they had one guy, name escapes me, I'm sure they'd know, who was overseeing the ship's construction and what training is being done. And then what basically happens is Downey, who's up on the river, Downey is sent down. Generally, it's interpreted as it had to do with politics and the new governor general who was sent out here, who didn't know the commander who was down here. He did know Downey. It wasn't, it wasn't a case where he said the other guy's no good. It's simply, I know Downey and have confidence in him, which I find interesting because I would argue that Downey's biggest failure came before the battle when he allowed himself to be maneuvered into giving battle at conditions that he knew were not at all favorable, that he should have been more resistant to the Army commander, to Prevost. There was this question of whether the Army should attack first. If the Army had taken over the American batteries here, they could quite possibly begin to force the American ships out into the bay, not directly from firing on them, but the thing is you could have made sure that there was no support for them. And, you know, the American ships had a lot of extra men aboard. They were not provisioned to fight independently. And so if you'd put ships over, well, even down like as far as a place like Valcour Island, and you could have stopped supplies from getting to the Americans. And if you're in the batteries here, the Americans would have had to come out into the lake and fight, and the British would have been in a lot better position. And Downey tried to tell them that. But I sometimes say it's a problem of letting the Army commanders tell the Navy what to do. They don't really understand the problems that are there. And because the season is, you know, progressing, but let's face it, it's not that late in the season. See, that's the other excuse given. It's not that late in the season for the simple reason that the British have absolutely no plan to continue the campaign that year. I mean, the plan is to essentially take Plattsburgh, garrison Plattsburgh, and then go over and burn over the over in Otter Creek, the dockyard and stuff there. This is not like Carleton. This is in 1776, where they planned a sustained, you know, campaign southward. This was it. This was it for the year to set us up for the winter. So the point is, they could have waited 2 weeks, or they could have to attack.
He could have laid to off Cumberland Head and just waited for the right moment.
Yeah, he could have laid out here, blocking them in. The Army takes the post, and frankly, the British Army so outnumbers the American that you got to say, you know, it probably would have worked.
Oh yeah.
Because they really do outnumber them. So
Fate is amazing in how things really turned out, though, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, and that's one of the things. Of course, I would argue. I know others would question it, but of course, I always tell my students that basically the Navy won the War of 1812 with the Lake Erie saving the West. And then this battle, Plattsburgh, convincing the British government to make peace. I mean, they don't even wait to see what's going to happen down in New Orleans. They make peace after this, and so I would argue that this is certainly this is to the American Revolution what Yorktown, or this is to the War of 1812 what Yorktown was to the American Revolution. It's that climactic battle. You know, I'm not going to say it's the absolute most important, because in the same sense, the victory at Lake Erie, one can argue, is like the victory at Saratoga. Stopped an invasion. You know, Lake Erie doesn't exactly stop an invasion, but what it says is if you control that water, you can invade them and they can't invade you. And of course, that's why the British have to withdraw from Detroit. And we launch an invasion that's turned back at the Battle of the Thames. But so essentially, these are the two key battles in terms of a military outcome.
Yeah. Our history books for the kids in school haven't always given it that position, though, have they?
No, they don't, and I think they don't for two reasons. One of the reasons they don't is looking from history backwards, you say, here's Andrew Jackson. And so where did Andrew Jackson make his name, the basis of his fame and so forth? So you increase that. Increase the value of that, even though everyone knows it took place after the war. You know, you'll get these books saying, well, it may have been after the war, but the British hadn't yet ratified the treaty. So what you're basically arguing is that the British would have backed out of a treaty they signed, you know, that the Parliament would have repudiated what was done by their diplomats because of that victory, which I have trouble believing, particularly when you read the orders to the British commander down there, Pakenham. It talks about capturing it doesn't say New Orleans, it says a post on the embouchure of the Mississippi that will cut off American trade, so economic, you know, make the blockade work better, and then it says, and provide us a position which may entitle us at the peace table to exact some measure from the Americans. In other words, it's a bargaining chip. So, but we've built that up because of Andrew Jackson, and then of course we've built up really Baltimore because of the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Had the Star-Spangled Banner not been written there, I don't think you'd get all this focus and coverage of Fort McHenry.
One of the negative aspects that I see is, had 1776 been fought by any other commander than Benedict Arnold. And I figured that Benedict Arnold's name put a blemish on the area, and yet you've got to read about the man to realize what a brilliant strategist, what a brilliant general he was, and how maligned and used he was. So because he is known more famously for his act of treason, they just kind of ignored the area, both for 1776 and the black mark carried over to 1814. That the same, let's ignore that area and let it go.
Well,
Finally, people are starting to realize what actually took place, what really did happen, and it's a blessing.
I think that certainly, I don't know about the black mark carrying over to the War of 1812, but it certainly has an effect on the view of Valcour Island. I remember, back in the late 50s or something, American Heritage had an article on Valcour Island, and I think the title of it was something like Benedict Arnold, Traitor as Hero, or some such, title, but I think it was a man named Hubbard wrote the article. But, that was the focus of it. The whole focus of it is not something which could have been, could have had some kind of a title for it, like the precursor to Saratoga, or yes, the die is cast, or something like this. Instead, you focus on Arnold. So I think that's definitely happened.
Part of his downfall too was the development of responsibility of the legislation of the new New York State and new United States government assuming their responsibility. That discouraged him. Because he, just as Frank says, he was just a wonderful strategist. You read all the interpretations of what he was done. He became very discouraged because of the central head, the way they were handling him. And I tell the scuba divers and anyone in this area that's interested in history, that channel between the island of Valcour and the mainland at Peru Dock, that's a wonderful cemetery. Those blue waters, there were 60 or 70 men, and at the time there was no government, there was no federal government to come to the mothers. Those are all MIAs, missing in action, and those mothers, when that young man went off with his gun on his shoulder, and she never saw him again. And think of the nights that the mother waited for that son to return, and it never happened. And no one from the United States government ever went to her with consolation. She died not knowing what happened to him. So we have that responsibility in that Valcour Bay also.
I had the pleasure of meeting a descendant of Arnold. And he is a film producer and a stunt coordinator from Hollywood. And he has a screenplay written about the Battle of Valcour. And it is his intention to produce a movie up here. He's presently negotiating the purchase of Valcour Lodge as a base camp for it, and eventual historical facility. If he pulls it off or not, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it sure did need to be done. Come back here a little bit, Frank, and let's just look at this picture and see what's happening. First of all, I want to say it's a play. I should have expected you'd walk in the door today. Secondly, I want to say, wherever I go, whenever people give us gracious compliments about this program called Our Little Corner, they almost always say, I love the shows you did with Captain Frank. Have we had good times together?
We had fun doing it. When you do something and you can enjoy what you're doing, it makes it just, it's psychic income. You can't deposit it in the bank, but you sure can enjoy it.
And when you walked in the door and you walked out here, Calvin said to me, if I zoomed in, I'd see goosebumps all over Frank's body. Is this exciting today?
It is. Gordy, it's just a dream come true. It's something that both you and I have thought of since the early 60s. And finally, with enough ideas, it's finally coming into fruition.
I don't know why it took so long. Sometimes it does. Good things take a long time to grow. But I'm so delighted that we've come to this point in history. It took the closing of Plattsburgh Air Force Base to make this room available. It took the closing of Plattsburgh Air Force Base to make the Old Stone Barracks available and that whole venue. Well, but who knows what grows out.
The Old Stone Barracks was available before. If you remember back, I think it was about 1963, I'm not sure, Colonel Gunn offered the Stone Barracks.
Yeah, I do remember.
The thrift shop, the hospital, not the hospital, the cemetery and the magazine, and he offered that to the Historical Society, and they put so many strings on it that it just didn't go through. This could have been happening back then if people would have been looking ahead as you and I did.
Yeah,
it's frustrating. You know, you can have the Air Force bases and you can have the factories, and these things can come and go. But the one thing they can't take away from us is this history, and the fact that the country in large is interested in history, and it is becoming an ever popular tourist event to visit historical places, Sturbridge Village, Williamsburg, Gettysburg, and it's entirely conceivable that we could be the same status as those other places that attract millions of visitors every year.
Well, that's the plan. You came in here today and you got some people excited by some maps and charts you brought. What did you bring with you?
Oh, just some stuff we used to put X's on and go diving. This looks like a good spot. Let's try it here.
But they were interested in looking at those things you had there.
I've got an interesting library at home. My historical library doesn't equal, but at least it's a portion of your music library.
Yeah.
So it's what we collect.
Well, you know, isn't it nice to see some of the top historians in the world gather here today and focus on something that you and I have pointed at for all those years?
Finally, the voice in the wilderness has been heard.
God, I'm so happy that I lived long enough to see this day.
Well, I'm looking forward to shaking your hands in 2014 when we are having the annual, the 200th celebration. That would be fantastic.
There's so much to do between now and then, but I think the big ball is rolling.
I think so too. I think it's going to work. It's just spectacular.
I can't wait to see what this painting is going to be like. Dean Moser is a most fascinating individual.
Oh, he is.
He's very, very serious about getting it right.
Yep.
Oh boy, we're taking one of the boats down. I don't know. That's the Confiance right there, I believe, that he's got in his hands.
It's entirely possible.
Oh yeah, wait a minute. I'm going to take my shoes off here. This is something that may be historical all by itself. May add a whole new dimension to what's going on here. Let me pick the cord up and who knows? Bill Glidden says, when are we going to show the tape? So we got little things written on the floor like Saratoga opens fire at 8:30, and we've got the measure out. Yes, Calvin?
Just wanted to maybe get that mic over in the middle of that.
Yes, let's do that. Let's get over here, a little bit over this way to see what we're listening to as we go.
Confiance is coming bow on. We know that Downey, the British court-martial, is specific that this anchor was in essence hanging ready to let go, or cock a bill, one of the two. All right, the cannonball impact on the one at Vergennes is just inside the fluke, and it is an absolute direct hit.
But he's not
It
coming.
didn't look like it was catted when it was hit.
He's not coming straight on because remember his position that he's trying to reach. He's still trying to reach to make northerly.
He's trying to get as far
north.
north as he
Correct.
can.
His head's further to the north.
Probably, yeah, and he's probably making this kind of leeway.
Yeah.
Either way, if this anchor is either hooked in here ready to let go, or whatever, this anchor you can't have a direct hit on it. Even if it's cock a bill, it would be difficult to do so.
Right.
This one is a sitting duck. I mean, as far as a direct hit goes, and it would tear it off. It would tear the shroud where it was tied and ready to let go, and tear it off and it would go down and hit here. Now,
Did you see the second impact point on that anchor?
I just saw the one just inside the
Okay,
fluke.
there's a second impact point on the wooden cross piece where the ball hit, dished the wood out to the diameter of the ball, and drove the wooden tree nail out about 2 inches.
Yeah, but that wouldn't have dislodged the anchor.
Wouldn't have dislodged it, but it was...
This one would have torn it off the forecastle.
But that would have,
channels.
but what Frank's saying would corroborate your theory that it came through the wooden piece and then struck
Came
the
through
fluke.
the stock.
Right. Okay.
And then hit
Yeah.
the right.
Which wouldn't
but it
describe
could-
a hit to a hanging anchor.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. But it certainly would describe this because this would probably be with a couple of lines onto one of the flukes, and this here ready to just let go. So if this anchor was the first one off, which one did they lose first, according to eyewitness accounts?
Well, we don't know. It could have been one on either side. You know, what did they find the anchor with? The starboard report?
They lost both of their larboard anchors coming in, didn't they? Yeah. So, and
the likelihood is that well, no, it doesn't say. It just say that they lost two anchors. It doesn't say which one went first.
Okay. But I think this is the first one. I think this one is this one.
True, but we don't know what sequence it got hit.
You don't know if that's the first or the second.
Okay.
Right.
I'm just asking. I'm just saying that that's.
Okay. What we have is what's logical though is that this position
Could be that way.
represents the westernmost feasible position, because if you get any further west, also you're getting too far west of the shoal on Crab Island.
East, Walter. East.
East. I'm sorry.
Because
Yes.
if that's the second, you're going to give them another couple hundred feet before they come up and anchor.
Yeah.
And then you're still going to talk a minimum probably 400 yards of the distance there. And that would still put them back
Right.
at least,
Right.
well, another
So-
couple hundred feet minimum.
What are we calling? 100 yards is under a foot on this, because it's 330
Right.
feet.
Right.
100 yards, but that's about 2 ship lengths. This thing is 1, 2, about 3 ship lengths to round it, because there's a decision-making lag. You know you lost an anchor. You find out what's the damage, or Downey sees it, makes a decision. She carries a ship length, 4 or 5 ship. That's 200 yards, so we're roughly 2 feet from the point of loss of the anchor. Is something like this. And then if we say from this point, we go, what do we say?
400 yards.
4 feet and change.
400 yards is about 4.5.
I like it.
I would say that's
I think that's close.
the easternmost.
Easternmost, and it could be further west.
Could be further based on where the pinch ended up. Well, you're still well out of range.
Now you're trying to make a little more
well out
sense.
of range. Yeah, it needs to be back.
Would you be comfortable moving it any further? It sounds like.
Just based on, distances where the pinch ended up back there, yeah. Just
Even
still
move it
doesn't
to this
look-
grid line.
Yeah, that's,
All right, let's move to the grid
Yeah.
line.
that makes, to me, that makes absolute sense.
That makes good sense. That makes good sense. Over also.
When we call this a dynamic process, you can get an idea what's happening here. You have these minds making educated guesses and actually moving the ships with fairly careful measurements based on their decisions at the moment. Doesn't mean that those positions may not change before the final decisions are made later today, but it's dynamic and moving. So here come all the other ships moving closer and closer. It's an educational process for all of us, and I hope for all of our viewers now and far into the future as to how this consensus is reached by the time this day is finished.
And the important thing, Gordy, is that this is so unique. I mean, this isn't something that's done throughout the world here. This is a unique gathering for a unique event.
It's absolutely unique. And that's why it's so exciting for those of us who are interested in studying the history of the Battle of Plattsburgh to get it right. And that's what Dean Moser's plan is, as you heard during the interview, to create a painting that is historically correct. But it also affects thousands and thousands of lives studying history in the future, because these people teach history, many of these people. These are, as I hope I made clear when we began the program today, these are the world's leading experts in naval battles, and specifically the War of 1812 and the Battle of Plattsburgh. So what happens here today will determine how they teach history in the future.
You know, it's kind of like an all-star game here. This is a Battle of Plattsburgh all-star game we're seeing here. It's just an amazing gathering that will probably never be duplicated.
No, you're absolutely right. So it pleases me especially to be here, and your analogy to a sporting event is absolutely correct, because in some sense a battle is a sporting event. And there are winners and losers, and a lot of excuses made from the losers, and a lot of discussion about it after. And you have to remember that on September 11th, 1814, we didn't have CNN. I mean, that sounds like a statement that doesn't have to be made, but we had very little way to chronicle that. We didn't have, not only did we not have live television, but we didn't have any kind of photography. So we had to rely on people's memories in describing it, which, as we've seen already today, was flawed because of individuals' bias. We had eyewitness accounts, and people were so excited. You can have 5 people watching a soccer game and come out with a different reason why a play was made. You know what I mean?
I get that all the time when I'm in the middle of a soccer game, and one crowd on one side cheering for one team, the other side on the other side cheering and seeing an entirely different game. And if you ask them after the game what happened, you'd get 2 or maybe 10 entirely different stories. And I've had instances where I have captured fights on the field, and the stories that went around after were not what was on the videotape, and the videotape spoke for itself. So unfortunately, we don't have any videotape of the Battle of Plattsburgh, but if we're ever going to get a recreation of it, this is going to be as accurate as we can get, is what we're getting right here today.
Yeah, this isn't just something that somebody laid down without a plan. This is all done to scale. And you can see, if you look carefully, you can see divisions of longitude and latitude. You have people not only talking about the specific dimensions of Plattsburgh Bay during the Battle of Plattsburgh, you have people who are measuring wind velocities based on accounts on what movement of the water there was, what the clarity of the water, the height of Lake Champlain, and so many factors involved in this discussion today. So this is a very serious discussion on trying to recreate the Battle of Plattsburgh on this day, which is again November 20th, 1999, a day that is historical itself because of what these men are speaking about today. Let us catch a little more of the conversation.
But she's got her head up, but she's leaving leeway coming in.
So it's strictly in a stowed position, and that could account for being knocked off the boat by at least 1, maybe 2 balls. Right. It showed impacts to 2 balls.
That's a very good point. You have that decision lag in there, and that second anchor goes, or even the first one is, oh my God, what do we do now? And you have to get that decision process, and then from the time you make the decision you're going to anchor, then you have to go through the evolution. So you've got a time distance lag there.
Well, and 2, Downey is not only the captain of the confines, he's also the commander of the flotilla.
Right.
He's looking at what's happening to the other vessels as well and seeing what's happening to his plan.
Yeah.
You know, he sees that he's got to stabilize this line and begin to fight before they tear him up.
He wants to do that, but we found out in Lake Erie, once, as you say, as Clausewitz said, when the first shot, he doesn't have a whole lot of control. He didn't do a whole lot of signaling. And they said the court-martial, that's what they had all the meetings for beforehand, was that each captain knew precisely what he was supposed to do. So basically it comes down to a ship-on-ship action. Yeah. They knew what they had to do. He had to rely on them, and no orders or signals were given. He relied on them. So he's got to be concerned about it, but he didn't have any control.
But he also he has no control over them, but he can signal them by what his ship does. In other words, if he drops anchor, they're not going to continue.
They're going to follow Convoy's.
They're going to follow the Convoy's.
They
That's
will know
what I
that.
meant.
And that's the whole thing. He doesn't have to signal them. He knows when they anchor, boys,
they're
drop.
They're going to drop too.
It's time to line up, open fire. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of things to discuss, from the most minute details to the general collection of details as they have been unfolded in the written history and the oral history, and how these various historians are interpreting things. We've got tape measures. We've got various kinds of tape. We drop a line, as Dean says, and we're putting new lines on the grid as we go to show the actual path and direction of these ships. And by the time we finish, if it's not accurate, it's probably going to be just about as close as we can get based on the knowledge we have today. Because not only have the people gathered here today read all the material, but they've written much of the material that's connected with the War of 1812, the Battle of Plattsburgh, and various other events connected with the War of 1812, because this was only one piece of the entire military action involved in that war.
Unless they had hove to, and as you say, they're sitting there, and at 8 is when they started to move in and around it.
They could have hove to with the idea of getting themselves organized to make the
and that's when they
attack.
started the approach to come around. That's when they made their move, was at 8 o'clock, and that's when he decided, because he's probably sitting there watching them.
Well,
The lookout boat's out there.
The lookout boat is probably further south because he wants to keep himself out
Exactly,
of range.
but he's there watching. They're hove to. He's sitting here watching,
Yeah.
and waiting for something to happen.
And he
as soon
sees
as
them
he
start-
that everything's over. They're starting to make their move.
He
announced their approach.
presumably is waving a signal flag of some sort.
He's
Yeah.
got something up there.
Yeah.
And as soon as they started to come around, he let
So
them know.
while that might be a rounding position, the 8 o'clock position is actually probably what we call the 7:40
timing is
position.
probably.
I think you're right. See, that's exactly what I think. Is I think they're waiting for the stragglers to catch up. They're trying to maneuver
Can be concurrent.
into
Because the ships were staying hove too.
For quite a while.
Right.
yeah. Because he says announce the approach. He doesn't say the enemy's sighted.
Right.
And see, he is looking across the head,
The land.
across the head to see the.
But the lookout boat has detected that these guys have braced their yards around, are starting
That's
to form
right.
up line, and they're moving again.
And the reason I would have him here is you need
Yeah.
the lookout boat because we're still close enough that if McDonough's people had seen it themselves, they wouldn't have announced, the lookout boat announced the approach. They
Yeah.
would have seen it themselves.
Resighted it,
So
yeah.
they have to be, if you will,
Right.
masked by the head, but the lookout boat out there sees it and sends
Right.
the signal in.
Right.
Just
So
as far as you're talking about, if they anchored at 9, you're talking about 2 nautical miles. And time, if
Right.
they're making about 3 knots, by the time they round and get in there.
Yeah. Announce their approach, which is another way of saying got underway
Yeah.
at 8 o'clock and anchored at 9.
Frank, the head comes up gradually to about 200 feet. On the Cumberland head has a 200 high foot elevation above the lake.
I wouldn't think, I think 200 feet would be high. You got a 95-foot elevation at the water, and if you got 100 feet over the water, well, 200 feet would be high.
That's right, but I'm saying he's got to be back in here. He's got to be hidden
Her masts were about 180
with the lookout boat
feet
out there.
high
at 8.
or so.
That lookout
I'm just saying
boat's
where
staying out longer.
the mast would with trees, the mast would start to become visible probably about here.
That would be reasonable.
Yeah. So from Saratoga, we're almost on it then.
Weren't they scaling their cannons when they came down the main channel?
That was way up there.
That was way up there. He said like 2 hours
And they
before
also-
to signal them. So the guns were scaled well before.
And they said the wind was directly into the forts
Yeah.
at that time. So it had to be up there.
So that'd be a northeast wind at that time.
Yeah, it was a long way. They were a long way.
Yeah,
up
they
there.
were up.
5:30 or so.
No,
Yeah,
northeast wind
at least
is
a couple
is
hours,
not
yeah.
consistent with a cold front.
But we don't. I think the court martial
Northeast
said they
wind
gave
isn't
them something like
consistent
2
with
hours.
cold
They
front.
had Prevost had 2 hours notice at
But-
least to get moving.
Probably
So
you get
it would
so much
start
land
at 8.
effect.
Yeah, that's the
Six.
wonder, is the land effect on this, because you really are in a...
Right.
Let's talk about distance from shore. He's got, how far to the island? Frank? Excuse me, how far to the island across here?
I'd have to scale it on a chart, about 2 miles.
About 2 miles, so
There's
do you think he'd be that close into the...
No, I don't, and the reason I don't is because he set this up with the Linnet toward shore from him, because Captain of the Linnet, because Pring's the one who's got the local knowledge. He's up here on the raid the year before.
So compliance
see,
is
I would
further.
have compliance further out, and you got the Linnet in here.
That's a half mile offshore, is what that is almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, you didn't want to get too close in these sailing ships at that time, because if you didn't want to get within more than a couple of cables distance, when you're going to make a maneuver like that.
Right.
You know, it's one thing if you're just sailing clear in a line ahead formation, but even in a line ahead formation, they always talk about it, but they're really staggered. And they're staggered so that they can react.
All right, but have we established that when she lay to, that her masts were visible over
Yes.
the land, but not the ships?
Right.
Yeah,
I think
they
we ought
can
to
probably
go back
see.
and just
They can probably see the tops of the
Just-
masts, but they can't figure out what they're
You can see
doing.
the
Could still
tops.
be further back.
They marveled at her size.
Straight across, 'cause it's on
straight across. Yeah, up is fine because we got so much reflection. So
Okay.
it's set well. So is this about?
I think that's believable.
Okay, that's a half mile and sticks are visible. All right, let's run on. And we have a time then for
We're showing at 9 o'clock. Now, you know,
depends on who you talk to.
That's right. That's obviously
At least an hour
approximate,
off.
but what I'm willing to say is it's about an hour. I wouldn't want to get...
But also, if you assume that they open fire at around 8:30,
Around
again,
8:30.
That's right, and it
that
matches,
works
because
out.
they
It
said
works
they
out,
opened
yes.
at 8:30.
8:30, I think, is our best figure.
Yeah. But you put that in the middle between the 8 and the 9. That's what was bothering me over here, is when we had a sign over here for 8 o'clock, it didn't match.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought your record. It's
Yes,
fast
indeed. That's why I brought
fast
it.
to find.
Yeah.
Roughly 1,000 squares.
Yeah, you wonder what watches were like that these guys had.
Well,
You see some of the disparities.
That's right, and that's why you go now. At least they tried to reset depending on the weather.
Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to reset every day at noon, and regularly they would be a half hour to an hour off. Because of course, you know, the problem is most of the ones that they were using were what they call mechanical, were with a spring, but the amount of humidity and the weather conditions made such a difference on the power of the spring.
We know that Downey had on him a pocket watch with a second hand on it.
Yeah, which was rare.
Yeah, very rare.
To have one with a second
But it would
hand.
be expected for someone of his position,
Mhm.
probably a gift or something. And he certainly would need it.
Yeah, but a lot of them didn't bother with a second hand simply because it was so inaccurate, and about the only one they would use one. You know, when they were timing, when we were talking here, the British would always say that if you could fire, a crack crew could fire 3 broadsides in 5 minutes.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying this minute and a half they're talking is a best case scenario.
Absolutely.
It's a best case scenario to run those in.
Well, and you know what the crew is composed of.
That's right.
39th Infantry.
That's right, and these are not experienced.
No, you got a Marine and some soldiers on each gun
I
with
have
midshipmen.
Sorry.
Oh dear.
Oh my gosh, the first casualty.
The first casualty. But they had some experienced riggers on board, so we did that. We're going to do an abrupt change.
Okay.
Frank is going to take us out over the battleground now.
Marvelous.
And we're going to go to Crab Island and around the head and then back in, and then we'll come back in this afternoon with that, and we'll knock it down to as they say, a science.
You see that? When we got here earlier, Frank says he's got a boat ready.
You want to go out?
And I can see the things cranking here, and of course. And I had an idea that this was going to happen, and we'd be able to go out on the water and take a look at the battleground, and this will get the juices flowing a little bit better. So what do you say we do that and get back to you at that time? Well, I'm not sure how you feel about what you've seen through the eyes of this camera, but this brain and Calvin's brain and those of most of the people who are gathered in this facility on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base are really cranked up and ready to go. We're having a good time exploring history and perhaps even changing our interpretation of history during this event on the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base on November 20th, 1999. This concludes this portion of the program, but as so many of our good programs in our little corner go, I think it's going to be a 2 or maybe even a 3-part series. So stay with us next time. We'll publicize very well what time the next program will be, and you will catch it right here where you're looking, and hopefully this program will be shown in classrooms for a long, long time to come. I know exactly where we're going to be next time for our little corner.
Heads up there. Because you see, if